Okay, so before we open it up for, and I want to leave plenty of time for you all who showed up today to ask questions, we do have a few that were submitted by students and graduate students, postdocs, and professors who registered for the event. And the first question that I wanted to pose is, actually, there were two questions that I kind of grouped together. One is from a professor who advises many doctoral students, and another is from a doctoral student in Spanish and Portuguese, and they both get at the same idea, which is, how do you manage the tension between trying for a long shot and not applying to every job that is out there that seems at all relevant? So in other words, how much of a stretch is reasonable? Should a student start out with a target number of applications they expect to make or not? And the other way of phrasing that is, do you recommend submitting a large number of applications for all of the jobs for which you may potentially be qualified for, or focusing on a smaller number of schools in order to personalize the applications?
I'm so glad that that question was asked. Because it's really important for two reasons. So the first thing I feel that it is a false dichotomy to establish an opposition between personalizing your applications and applying for a lot of jobs. I believe you have to apply for a lot of jobs, and you have to personalize each and every application. So the idea that you're not going to personalize your application because you're applying for a lot of jobs is an outdated idea. And there is the advice that used to be given back in the day, but it is not good advice right now. Now, the reason that I believe in applying for a lot of jobs, and I know that not everyone agrees with this, but I observed one principle above all other principles when I was on the market. Well, even more, certainly when I was on the market. In fact, yes, when I was on the market. Absolutely, it applied to the job I got, but even more so when I was looking at hires come in to my departments, is what I call the principle of job market unpredictability. And what that is that you literally have no idea what's going on in the search committee. And you just don't know. And you think you know because you've read the ad, and the ad seems to be written perfectly for you, or seems to be written for somebody totally different from you. But the fact is there's a group of human beings behind that ad who have a bunch of agendas and who are shifting around, and you have no idea what is ultimately going to be prioritized in that job search. And when I got my first job at the University of Oregon, I almost didn't apply to that job because it just was like, oh, this is just whatever. This is just, you know, I had all these other jobs that I thought were perfect for me, and I didn't get shortlisted for those. And then this one job that was like so random, out of left field, and I was like, well, whatever, I'm just typing them, I might as well just, you know, do another. And that's the job I got. And over and over and over again this happens. And part of the reason it happens is that job ads get written in spring. So it's just logistical. Sometimes. Job ads might get written in spring, and there will be a search committee who will write this ad, and then all of a sudden, the person who was on the search committee who insisted that gender be the single most important priority on that job ad, suddenly they get hired somewhere else unexpectedly and leave, and suddenly they're not on the search committee anymore. And suddenly the idea of gender, the theme of gender that was so important when they wrote the ad, suddenly it has no advocates at all left on the committee. And the rest of the committee is now free to pursue the other thing they really wanted, which was race. And so you don't know that. You don't know that. I was alternate for a job once for a Japan job. I was a Japan anthropologist. Ultimately there were two of us, and they offered it to the other person. And it turned out that the other person was a linguistic anthropologist, not a cultural anthropologist. And I finally said to the chair, why are you hiring a linguistic anthropologist? This job ad was for a cultural anthropologist. And for those of you who know anthro, these are entirely different subfields in the field, like totally different training. And they were like, oh yeah, well, you know, because we just didn't write it in the ad, but we lost a couple of linguistic anthropologists. So we were really, really, really hoping that with this Japan hire, we could bring in a linguist. That was nowhere in the ad. So it's a very long-winded way of answering to say, please apply for every job you possibly can, because you literally have no idea what's going on.
Okay, we had several doctoral students submit questions regarding reference letters. One asked, how much do recommendation letters really matter? Another asked, for the academic job market, what do you do if you feel that you can't depend on a strong and personalized reference from someone who's on your committee, who maybe should be writing your letter, but you don't think they'll give you a good reference? What's the kind of strategy to deal with that?
Well, the first question is one of those that makes me uncomfortable, because I feel like I can't speak for, I don't, are reference letters important? Yes, I think they are. I really think they are. I think they're quite, all of the job searches that I ever sat on, they were read very, very closely. And they weren't just read closely for what they said, they were also examined for who was writing them, and the field of the person writing them, the status of the person writing them, and the institutional location of the person writing them. And then once you had interpreted all of that, then you read what they actually wrote and gave it a certain amount of weight that would be different based on their status. So in other words, a full professor had more status, more oomph, heft than an assistant professor and all that kind of thing. But whatever. Anyway, so yeah, I would say they're extremely important. And if you can't be sure that you're getting a strong letter, I would say it would be wise to ask, to have a conversation. To have a conversation with that person and say, so I just wanted to talk to you about letters. Because I've been asking you to write a lot of letters, and I just want to, I want to just talk to you about, and this is awkward. I'm not saying it's not awkward, it's really awkward, but you can't just continue on in uncertainty, and if you have a good reason to believe that that letter is bad, you cannot keep using that letter. You can't. It's not going to work. There's, remember that thing I said, they're looking for a reason to reject you? One bad letter, even a overt, a conspicuously lukewarm letter, well, that's enough. So, so by all means, I would consider shifting out with someone else that you can find who you know will support you.
At this point, I'd like to invite anyone who has a question for Dr. Kelsky to come up through the center aisle and ask their questions. Many of the questions that I had on the list were already addressed in the talk, but if you feel that you had submitted one that wasn't addressed, please do come up and ask.
Can I just go from here? Okay. I guess I get to go because I was in the front row, so thank you. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to the suggestion that you gave on organizing a panel. This is something that I have recently been able to do, but it was quite difficult to find participants. I took the strategy of perhaps choosing a field that was a little bit too specific to something that I was very interested in, and contacting professors who then would often offer me suggestions for other people, and actually ended up having difficulty finding professors to participate as opposed to graduate students with me. Because I don't know if it's because of name recognition, nobody knows who I am, or because my topic was a little bit too specific. I'm in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese, and this was for the Renaissance Society of America conference. So just to give you a little bit of context, any suggestions you have would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So you ended up not finding professors? So
I found one.
Okay.
Yeah, and
that's
so
good.
It's a couple of graduate students and one professor. Sorry,
Mm-hmm.
I know this needs to be recorded. So yeah, there was, in the end, I found one professor, which is the requirement for the conference, and the rest of us are graduate students.
Huh. Yeah, well, I'm intrigued by what you're saying about too specific. Obviously, I don't know how, I don't know what your topic was, and even if I did, I wouldn't be able to interpret where it fits into your field. But you definitely when you're a grad student and you're inviting faculty to be on a panel, The status thing is complicated because you don't want to be dictating to them what they need to be talking about, but at the same time, you are the organizer of the panel, and you do get to dictate the thematic of the panel. So making sure that it is general enough to give people scope to bring in their own interests to some degree is really important. So that may have been, like you're identifying, that may have been the problem. Did you start well in advance? Did you take a lot of time to do this?
Well, so the panels need to be sent by June 1st,
Mm-hmm.
And I pretty much started organizing right after the conference ended the previous year.
Wow.
First week of April, mid-April.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
That seems to be when they
Uh-huh.
are organized, and
Yep.
I'm already getting a lot of people responding with, I'm already on a different panel.
Uh-huh.
So it seems like they're already kind of getting put together at the previous conference, which I think is the background.
Uh-huh.
So,
Interesting.
yeah, I don't know if it's just very conference specific or if it has something to do with my position as a grad student. I did find that kind of difficult
to navigate that. Yes. Well, it's hard to say. I would say, I mean, taking what I'm hearing from you, I would probably start even earlier. I would probably do a little more, perhaps offer a broader spectrum of possible topics. And then I, being me, with my particular obsessions, I would wonder what you said exactly when you approach them. Because, the devil is really in the details of the wording. And I'm not saying you did anything wrong, but if I were like advising you, not here in public, but personally, I would be like, show me that email. I want to see what you did. And I want to see that if you had to do an abstract did you have to do an abstract and give it to them? Yeah, I would study that as well. So I'm not saying there's a problem, but there might be.
Hi, I'm Anthony Hernandez from EPS, and I have a question about working for the government or working in places that require security background checks.
Oh, yeah.
And then also credit. I have a longtime advisor who suggested that now is a good time for me to start thinking about making sure my credit is perfect and then making sure that there's no blemishes in my background. So I just wanted you to speak to that if you could.
Your credit?
Yeah, consumer credit.
Why is that an issue?
So you wouldn't want bad credit, and since my advisor is somebody who's outside of the academy, that's something that normally happens in their field, is that they check an applicant's credit just to make sure they're managing their life responsibly.
That for sure. Oh, I see. So credit is part of a criminal background check? I didn't know that. Uh-huh. Yeah, no, that's helpful. Wait a minute, now I got distracted by the credit check. What was the other half of your question?
Security background check. So I'm going to work for the government, and just thinking about that now, I don't have any worries now, but just if you had any advice on going through that process. You know what? I'm going to say I don't have advice because this is way too far outside of my area of expertise, and I don't want to speak, off the cuff about something I don't know about, so I'm sorry I don't. Yeah. Good luck, though. It's kind of, I think that this is an important question. I mean, I think that I have a feeling this is something that may really be in flux right now, too, with the change in administration. Anyway, yeah.
I am a graduate student in the Department of French and Italian, and I had a question about a line you had on a slide about the importance of teaching, or the importance of only teaching perhaps 3 courses as a sole instructor. A lot of graduate students at the University of Wisconsin, especially in language programs, are instructors of record in these courses, and these are how our graduate experiences are funded. So I'm curious if you can articulate a little bit the claim that you're making about why a diversity of teaching experiences is necessarily something that would push us sort of in what you see, or what seems to be the reject pile.
Oh, okay. Let me clarify that. As long as with the academic questions, it's always like, but then on the other hand, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about what I'm worried about is adjuncting. not teaching as a grad student in a program. So in the department I was head of, East Asian Languages and Cultures, we employed almost entirely graduate students who taught Chinese, Japanese, and Korean. So and that was exactly how most of our grad students paid their way through the grad program. So I'm very familiar with that. And I mean, yes, it's actually, that is a related problem. It is very difficult to teach and get your writing done, and get your publishing done, and go to conferences, and all of that stuff. But that isn't specifically what I was talking about there. What I was talking about there was the decision that when people get into an adjunct spiral and teach and teach and teach, and it's not, and it's not quite as good a set of circumstances as people like you, because to adjunct, you're often driving campus to campus to campus, and it's quite overwhelming time-wise, and then you're not getting your writing done. So you're okay with that.
In a world where graduate students here are teaching on their programs and publishing is sort of the way of the market, what's the prioritization strategy? Teaching is important in developing your teaching skills, which is a relevant job characteristic, but you don't have time to do that and publish at the same time. So, I mean, I guess the million-dollar question is, how the hell do you do it all and get a job?
Yeah, you don't sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a ridiculous and untenable situation. And basically you cut corners in teaching, which is the exact same advice that I gave to assistant professors in the department who were trying to get tenure, which is, you know, in fact, when I was an assistant professor, someone told me, a senior woman told me, she said, show me a woman with a teaching award and I will show you someone who's not getting tenure. That was advice I got when I was an assistant professor. And basically it's like, you know, you put too much work into teaching, you do too good a job of teaching, you invest too much time in teaching, and you are not putting your priorities where they need to be to actually get the job that will allow you to continue teaching. And I just want to say, too, that this goes even more so if you are female, because women often get sucked into this sort of codependent thing of putting too much effort into their teaching and cathecting too much onto the identity of being a teacher, and also if you are a person of color, because of the additional demands on you for all of this kind of other uncompensated, uncredited advising that you're doing for students of color on campus, especially right now where things are so scary and intense, so that so there's all of this other teaching and mentoring that you're doing that is utterly invisible and that you're not getting any credit for. So that's another element that plays into this, which is why, I mean, there are so many studies that show that despite all of these efforts to bring women and people of color into the professoriate at the assistant professor level, get to full professor, it's a sea of white men, just a sea of white men. It's crazy. When I was at the University of Illinois, when we used to have these things with the dean and the provost, and it was like, la, 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 big thing, catered, and like, oh, we're going to like make a big party to, you know, let's like, you know, trot up all the brand new hires for the assistant professor. And then let's trot up all the newly tenured associate professors. And let's trot up all of the newly promoted full professors. And we did it every year. And the assistant professors were this beautiful, diverse, you know, collection of people, and then the newly tenured associate professors were primarily white, but there were some women, and then the full professors were, you know, 25 white men. It was crazy. So that took your question a little bit down a little digression, but the point is, you have to, you cannot get a job based just on teaching, and I don't care what anyone is telling you, and I don't care how much you love it. And I don't care how important you think it is. Nobody is going to, I mean, outside of, say, community college level jobs, which do absolutely prioritize teaching, but if you are seeking jobs of a higher, like, I'm going to say higher status than that, but I don't mean to disparage them, but like have a higher scholarly profile, you have to have a research profile.
So I want to ask a question about non-academic jobs. I have been on the job market for 2 years at the 2 campus visits, but I think I think I failed those interviews. And so I'm open to more other possibilities. So I'm kind of used to subscribing to Hire a Job and Vita, those websites, and subscribe to their email alerts. But in terms of non-academic jobs, I don't know where to look for those job opportunities. And if they say they require a bachelor degree or a master degree, does that mean I am overqualified? Like various concerns that one can have for a non-academic job. Could you also talk about having a PhD, how to search a job, non-academic job with a PhD degree? Thank you. Sure.
So that was a lot of questions in one. The best thing, and gosh, I don't know if I said this here. I said it in the history department, that the Versatile PhD is a fantastic resource, and Wisconsin is a member institution, and that means you have access to all of their resources. I know that the office that is putting on this event, we're bringing me here today, is also running an event with the Versatile PhD sometime this spring. Do you know the date? It's like April something.
Well, there are panels that are online that we always send out through Grad Connections. One is already passed, but there is another social sciences panel coming up about working in think tanks, I believe it is, in non-STEM field, for both STEM and for social science humanities.
And in addition to just that is officially being supplied by campus, I would venture to guess that there are Versatile PhD meetup groups here in Madison that are meeting informally. Because they're everywhere, and it's quite a big organization, and some of it is very formal, and some of it is very informal. But the point is that you can network with other people who are looking for non-academic jobs and other people who have non-academic jobs. So the best thing that you can do is educate yourself about other people who have already made this transition. Don't reinvent the wheel. Don't start at point A and try to figure out how to do it when there's a whole sea of people, probably here in Madison, and certainly available through the wonders of the internet, who have already successfully made that transition. So, and then the resources on Versatile PhD also show you how to write a resume, and many, many different kinds of resumes. So the one that is appropriate for you with your background, that would, for the kinds of jobs you're looking for, as opposed to a resume for someone else in another field for a different kind of job. And then like I said, like was implicit on the slide that I showed, in the non-academic realm, the statistic is something like 75% or 80% of jobs are found through personal connection. And so, although of course you can look on websites like idealist.org, right? Idealist.org? Idealist.org, yeah. Which is a job site for people who want to work in more or less the nonprofit and educational realm, which is a very natural fit for PhDs. Go to idealist.org and look at the jobs. There will be jobs advertised. That's fantastic. You can look at jobs that are advertised in other sites like that. But in the end, it's probably going to be a personal connection that gets you the job, so there's no substitute for the networking. And that means getting yourself out to meetings and talking and connecting and that kind of thing. So good luck. It is challenging.
On the Versatile PhD resource, I just wanted to mention that the UW-Madison has an institutional subscription, so you could actually access it for free. If you were to access it as an individual, you would have to pay to subscribe. But if you log in through the UW system using your NetID, I believe it is, through the graduate school website, you could actually access the website for free.
And you access materials, things that you wouldn't access if you just go to the Versatile PhD website.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I have two questions and they're interrelated. I should state first that I'm in the School of Education. So in my field, there's a huge rise of kind of two separate lines, the teaching line and the research line. And so to the previous questionnaire who was standing right here from the Italian department, kind of speaking about research versus teaching. I'm wondering, because I've actually had 2 interviews related to what they call clinical positions. Sometimes they like to dangle in front of you that this may be converted to a tenure line position. So I wanted just to hear your thoughts on the likelihood of that happening. And then second, the reason I'm looking towards clinical lines is not only, I know you hate the word, but my passion for teaching. Within the field of education, I think that makes sense, and that's a really good thing. So we should be highlighting excellent teaching practices within School of Education. But I also have 2 small children. So how does one do all of that plus keep small children alive? If you have any advice. In particular, I guess a question along that line and academic parenting and so forth is, do you even bring it up, or should you bring it up on a campus visit?
Oh my gosh. Okay, wait. So wait a minute. What was the actual question though? The dangling of the tenure track, and does that really happen?
Yeah, clinical versus teaching, does it ever convert? So is it desirable to go after a clinical position if teaching is something that you maybe prioritize over research?
Yeah, I mean, there are good clinical positions. They tend to not be tenure track. They tend to be, sometimes they are, but usually they're contract. But they tend to be pretty good. They have multi-year, and they have benefits, and they're full-time. And in the grand scheme of things, in terms of the available academic jobs on campuses right now, they're pretty good. So yeah, absolutely.
Do they convert? Because both institutions said they could, but
they can, and it's not unheard of.
Okay.
But please don't make a life plan based on that.
Got it.
I have so many clients, so many, who come to me with a story. They told me, I took this 1-year job, they told me it was going to be tenure track, and then either A, it was not because of budgetary problems, or B, it was, and they didn't hire the inside candidate. I do hear stories, sometimes the inside candidate does get the job. I mean, there's not one thing that always happens, but gosh, I sure hear more stories of it not working out than of it working out. And then the 2 small children. Oh my gosh. Well, I had 2 kids on the tenure track, and I did it because I had 2 years of research leave, which, this being the United States, substituted for adequate maternity leave. So I basically used my research leave to have children. And I also wrote my book. So that was not pretty. That was brutal. I would get up at 5. I literally did this, and I am not a morning person, let me just say. And I got up every morning at 5 because my daughter, who, the only time I knew for an absolute fact that she would sleep was between 5 and 8 in the morning. And then the rest of the whole 24 hours was a total crapshoot as to when she would sleep. But she always slept from 5 to 8. So I just got up and wrote from 5 to 8. And that's how I finished my book for tenure. So, yeah, so there's a lot, oh my gosh, this is a huge subject. Are you a member of the Academic Mamas Facebook group? Okay, good. That's a lot of interesting stuff there. I continued, so there are 2 different ways to answer this. The one is that academia is flexible, and you do have the opportunity to pick up, take your kids to daycare, pick them up, and that you aren't stuck in an 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 situation, and that is good. And the other side is that academia is a world of is a workaholic situation in which you are literally never off the clock. And so you can never relax and enjoy your children because your weekends are consumed. And both of those are true. And so it just comes down to it isn't the worst world in the world, to manage to balance kids and a career, because you do have the flexibility to do it. And like if your kids get sick, you can, I was often able to either bring my kids into the school or whatever. I just had the flexibility to deal with it. But But you have to be able to say, you know, it does impact your productivity, and it may. And I cannot promise you that you'll be able to balance both and be as productive as you need to be at every moment that you need it, right exactly when you need it, when your PhD is still fresh. Because there is the question that I'm often asked in Q&As is how many years do I have before my PhD gets too stale? And again, I can't answer that because everybody's record is different, the field is different, the demand is different, and so on. But you know, after about, you know, I don't know, about 4 or 5 years, you have a problem. You have a problem. Now, if people who are in a postdoc, anyone who's a postdoc freaking out, if you're in a postdoc that's very productive, then you're good, you're okay, you're still on the track, But if you are not in any kind of like position that you can really point to, and you're just sort of adjuncting, and you're just kind of like neither here nor there, then it's very difficult. It gets harder and harder and harder to convert into a tenure track job. So again, the kids, they're young, they're really intense right now, and this is exactly when you need to get that first job. You know, I can't promise you that it's going to time out right.
Yeah, I'm just going to stay sitting down and use the mic, but I'm interested in the fact that it seems to me, looking at least social science jobs, there's a lot more push for people to be active online, to be blogging their research, to be, if they're published in a relatively decent journal, the journal wants them to write a blog post. There are a lot of discipline-wide blogs where you can take your science and speak to the public. And I'm just wondering if you, with the range of clients, whether that's A, outside the social sciences, and B, whether you think it makes any difference, even though it's being pushed.
That's such a good question. And that is so much in flux. I'd answer that differently today than I think I would have answered it a year ago. Up until a year ago, and I'm still going to give a version of that answer, but a year ago I would have said very decisively, blogging is great, but you are judged on your traditional academic output. And it is no substitute for peer-reviewed journal articles. And conversely, if you look like you're blogging all the time, which some people are, and you hardly have any articles, they're going to be very, very concerned about you and your priorities. But I feel like I'm seeing, well, first of all, in the field of English and digital humanities, they want you to do that, so it actually helps to build your record of competitiveness for the job, on the one hand. And then on the other hand, I feel like this is absolutely in flux. And especially now with the crisis that is so much more intensified just since November, that the idea that we can somehow, as scholars, reach a popular audience has become so much more urgent. And I suspect that it is more well regarded this year than it was last year. So I can't give a definitive answer, but I think it's actually increasingly important. But it still doesn't replace that peer-reviewed journal article. You still have to have 1 or 2 of those at least, but then they love it when they see the blogging on the side.
Hi, so I really enjoyed your talk, and I'm really grateful you came, and I learned a lot, and I'm sure everybody else did too. But with your permission, I'd like to play devil's advocate, if I may. Specifically, it's really obvious as you speak that you really care about the students and the postdocs and the people you're helping. But first and foremost, I think you're a businesswoman, and this is a business the professor is in, and it's very, very successful. And of course, this is a major, if not a primary source of income for you. And that's great, and I don't criticize that. This should not be a charity, and of course, you absolutely should charge. But I think a lot of your clients are PhD students who are working 5 jobs to pay their tuition, or postdocs who have been chronically underpaid for years. There are adjunct professors who, as you said, 25% are below poverty line. And I know adjunct professors who don't even work enough hours to get food stamps. And these are really your primary target audience in terms of your potential clients. So when I look on your website and I see that you charge $150 an hour to read a job document, or $200 for a quick look, I mean, I'm quoting, of a job letter, then I'm kind of reminded, I think, that some people would say that there is a really fine line between making a profit and potentially really blatantly profiteering from some of the most vulnerable members of the academic community. So the first part of my question is, How do you feel about that? And how do you feel that the service that you provide, which is obviously phenomenally good, and I have people who have really benefited from your work, how do you think it fits within that spectrum? And the second part of the question really is, you're not the only person with this business model. Obviously, there are other people doing similar things. And it used to be that to get into higher education was very expensive, and it still is. To study at a higher education institution is a lot of money. You need resources and finances. It's not accessible to a huge portion of society, I think, still. And now it seems like, as you've highlighted, there are so many PhDs and there are not enough jobs. And so now we're almost in a position where once you get into academia, once you get into higher education, you get your PhD, and now it's like there's another glass ceiling where if you can't afford to have access to the kinds of resources that you provide, and which supervisors should be providing, if you can't afford that or you don't have those resources, then really you're not going to be a competitive candidate. And I understand that you've got the book and the blog and other resources, but those aren't really comparable to the gold standard of what you do, which is $150 an hour. I'll tell you what's wrong with your specific job documents. So is this business model really helping? I mean, we're helping some people who have the access and the resources to really make themselves competitive, but is it not at the expense of those people who really are traditionally underrepresented in academia already, who just can't afford the kinds of services that you provide?
Well, those are good questions. So the first thing that I would say in response to the issue of who has access to my work, actually, the number of people who actually work with me is microscopically small compared to the thousands upon thousands of people who read my blog and who have, and before my book, just read my blog, which was entirely free. And then the book is about $11. And I get far more emails telling me from readers who never paid me a cent, who tell me, I read your book, I overhauled my job documents, I read your chapter on interviewing, or I read your blog post on interviewing, I read your vitae column on interviewing, or your vitae column on the campus visit, and I redid my entire approach, and I got a job, and thank you so much. And I've never been your client, and I'm so grateful for your work. And I get, probably 10 of those for every one I get from a client who actually paid me. So I feel really fine about the accessibility of my work, which, was out there, which I intentionally put out completely for free. I held nothing back. There was no secret information that I held back, other than the actual act of working with me, where I actually read the document and did the editing, but there was no special stuff that you got. I mean, everything was there for free, and still is. It's still there for free on the blog. I did take probably out of God, I don't know how many blog posts I have now. 6 years of blogging on a weekly basis. What is that? With a month off in the summer. Anyway, whatever those hundreds of blog posts. I think when the book was published, Penguin asked me to trim a few of my posts, and so I think I trimmed 5 posts so that they only have like the first half of the post, and then it's like, to read the rest of this post, please read my book, and that's like 5. That's a total of like 5 posts. So anyway, so I feel. Really, my conscience is really clean about that, and so I it's interesting that I do, in terms of the people who pay me, it's I work with people to make sure that they are really, I really try to make sure that when I work with someone and they're paying me, that they are operating on a reality basis. That's very important to me. I hate to foster delusion. And so when I work with someone, I want to make sure that first of all, whenever anyone gets in touch with me and they describe their circumstances, if they are in really bad circumstances, I first of all say, are you absolutely sure that you want to work with me? Because I'm expensive. And are you sure you can't get it from the book and the blog? And then if they're really, and they're like, no, this is my 4th year on the market, I'm desperate, I absolutely need help, then I have a thing called the Job Seeker Support Fund. And I basically offer my services at a quarter of my usual rate if they meet certain criteria, such as being on food stamps or having a health crisis or something like that. So, and then, yeah, anyway, so because of all this like kind of, you know, a series of adaptations and accommodations and things, I really feel like, you know, it's okay. But your core question of, is this adding another layer of, you know, people who have economic privilege, do they have even more privilege because it's easy for them? Which for some clients it is easy. Well, actually I don't know how easy it is. I actually can't say it's easy, but it's less hard. I know for some clients it's less hard. Yeah, that's true. It's true. People who have more privilege and who are able to pay me or anyone else like me, they have a leg up. I've been concerned, sorry, I just wanted to say, when I started out, it's been very interesting to watch my clientele change because in the beginning, it was more people who were from marginal programs who were interested in working with me. And as the business has grown, it has become more people from Ivy Leagues. I mean, not entirely, but there has been a greater like influx of people, and I watch that and I think, what is this? I feel weird about it.
Thank you for answering the question. I appreciate your candor, really. And the reason I asked was not so much criticism, but I've had friends who really wanted to use your services and felt so desperate about using it, but just couldn't afford it, couldn't justify the fee. So I hope that, if anything, your answer, which I really found I really respect your answer, will help anyone who is thinking about sort of investing in your time to really see the perspective of where those numbers come from.
Yeah, you're welcome.
We just have a couple of minutes before 6 p.m. And so I'm going to allow one last question. I know that there were at least 3 other people who had asked, and maybe you could ask those questions during the reception. We'll let Dr. Kelsky make her way over to where the food is instead of trapping her in here. And then you could ask her in that setting. And I'm sorry that we've run out of time, but this will be our last question.
Thank you. So I have 2 questions really quick, but one is fairly easy. Applying for grants. So I am a person who kind of collects CVs in my field, and I've noticed that folks put that they've applied for a grant, but it wasn't successful. And so to me, that it's kind of pointless.
What field are you in?
I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Walter Parrish. I'm in educational leadership and policy analysis. And so I really didn't understand, and like I said, I've collected several CVs and I've seen that, and I really didn't understand the purpose of that. And then my second question is, you talked about your field as anthropology, and then your specialization in Japanese anthropology. And so if there is a conference or an organization around your specialty, how do you navigate publishing and presenting in that specialty area, although it may be outside of your realm? So for instance, I'm in education, but I study the experiences of faculty members, and so my minor is in HR around the workplace, and so I want to be able to publish in the HR realm, but will education value that? Yep,
that's a great question. The first one about the CV, so you need to check your field convention. I do not think that most fields put declined grants, or grants that you didn't get, right? I think maybe some STEM fields do, because you have to show this record of I'm always applying. But I don't know for sure, so I don't want to tell you one way or the other, but it's a little bit odd, but it might be true for your field. So if that is true for your field, then go ahead and do it. And there is a positive sense. It's showing you that you're very entrepreneurial. I mean, I suppose if at some point you have 10 grants that you didn't get, that begins to tell a slightly different message. But, you know, anyway. Okay. You have asked the, like, $64,000 question of people who have interdisciplinary PhDs, which is, so I wrote a column about it about 2 or 3 years ago, and it's called The Curse of the Interdisciplinary PhD. And the reason I called it that is because it's really hard. So both of my academic positions were joint between anthropology and Asian studies. And I had to navigate very, very carefully for my tenure case and for getting hired, how much of a publishing record I had in anthro and how much of a publishing record I had in Japan studies. Because so my tenure home was always anthropology, because it tends to be, the discipline tends to be the higher status and house you, and then your area specialization or secondary is like just an add-on, even though they were 50-50 positions. But my tenure home being anthro, I had to make my primary case in anthro, which meant my primary publishing had to be in anthro, but I still had to have a foot in Asian studies conferences, grants, and publishing. So it took a lot of careful navigation. When I was the head of the Department of EALC, we produced PhDs who had EALC PhDs. Our department was comprised of religious studies, history, literature, anthropology, and linguistics. All of those PhDs had chosen one of those fields as their specialization, but they did not finish with a linguistics PhD or a history PhD or a religious studies PhD. They finished with an EALC PhD, which was a major problem on the job market, because then they were not as competitive for like a history job, even though they were historians, well-trained, because they had this other PhD. So the point being, I'm not sure exactly which of these sets of circumstances apply to you, but the point being, you need to really, really, really study the job market. Who is hiring? Who tends to hire? What field do you really want a job in? Or maybe I should say, what field do you really have a chance of getting a job in, as opposed to your fantasy job? What actual existing institutions and departments are actually hiring? And when they hire, what do they put in their job ads? And to the best of your ability, meet those expectations in your publishing. And then build that record about the HR stuff, only when you're quite sure. Now, if you say back to me, but Karen, they both do. I see ads in both equally, just as much, 100% equal. Then I'd say probably do twice as much work. Sorry. Yeah.
Well, we've come to the end of the time that we have today, but we do hope that you join us just outside of these front doors on your left-hand side. We've ordered way too much food, so please do hang around and chat amongst yourself, and also maybe you could ask some of those questions that were left unanswered. Thanks again for coming. Please don't forget to fill out the evaluations and drop it off. We really do read those and take those into account. And above all, thank you so much to Dr. Karen Kelsky for all of the useful advice she offered.